occasion, churches around the country will be celebrating, as we are, the life and legacy of one who, not unlike the prophet John the Baptist, which we heard about in the gospel today, cried out in the wilderness against racial injustice, and who heard the voice and had a vision of God, and who heard and answered the call of Almighty God and responded in the affirmative, saying, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And so we gather today on this frigid Sunday morning, warmed by a memory of one who this day casts a benign shadow over this nation and causes a shiver of hope to pass through us. Even a memory of one who did not live to see his normal span of life as it yielded to an assassin's bullet. Yet this whole land is affected so deeply and so completely. And people of diverse backgrounds come together on this day to celebrate this life. We celebrate the life of one who did not come of a majority people, but who came from the loins of a disinherited and disallowed people. One who was the seed of enslaved Africans and who tasted the bitter cup of oppression. Yet, even so, from one end of the country to another, even across the globe, we remember one about whom the Nathaniels of his time have wondered, can anything good come out of Nazareth? The skeptics of history must have asked, can anything good come from this son of Morehouse, this son of the South, this country bumpkin, this poor preacher endowed with ebony skin? And yet the world is now gathered together today in homage to Martin Luther King Jr. And this nation has paused for a brief moment to be warmed by his memory and lighted by a hope. 51 springs and winters have come and gone, and yet the shadow of this prophet looms larger than ever. For here was a life of such broad grandeur, such passion, such commitment, and such dedication to humanity that we are still trying to fully understand the impact of the gift, the grace, the life of this magnificent human being. Even though in this new decade we still are unable to grasp the true meaning of his life, we do understand this. We understand that this life has affected each of us and has affected this land indelibly and irrevocably. The glow of the life of Martin Luther King Jr. will not go out, and its impact will not lessen, and its force will not dim. And so as I seek to set this life in the proper context and to somehow exploit the brilliance of its existence, as I have likewise known the fruits of its labor and have tasted of their promise, and as I now relax metaphorically on the foundation laid by those who now take become of that dream? What has become of that dream? Have you ever forgotten a dream? There are some who can recall a time when you dreamed a wonderful dream, but awakened only to learn that you had forgotten the dream. You knew it was a great dream, but you couldn't quite remember what it was. There are some dreams we remember vividly, in intricate detail, but we are troubled by those that we just can't remember. The idea of forgotten dreams does not apply to nocturnal dreams alone. There are many who have abandoned the dreams of their youth and forgotten them. Do you remember that dream you had? Do you remember dreaming about your career? Do you remember dreaming about your future relationship? Do you remember dreaming about the kind of house you would live in and the goals you wanted to achieve? Some never abandoned their dreams and achieved many of their goals. Others were sidetracked. They woke up one day, years later, realizing that they had forgotten the dreams altogether. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired and challenged the nation to rise up to a higher calling. He challenged America to become one that recognized the sovereignty of God and the equality of all humanity. He spoke against unjust wars and unjust laws and injustice in our court system. He worked to eliminate poverty and organize workers and to eliminate racism and sexism on every front. In 1963, he told the nation as thousands assembled on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. and listened, that he had a dream for America that was deeply rooted in the American dream. His words have been repeated by the generations that have followed since that historic day. Yet, as time passes, it becomes increasingly evident that while America remembers his speech, it has obviously not fully embraced the dream or has abandoned the dream altogether. Tomorrow, the impeached President of the United States and his surrogates will stand in sacred places and tout this dream, all the while working on policies that make America a nightmare for many. In America, we remember the speech and its words of peace, but our nation still engages in unjust wars on foreign shores for the sole purpose of securing oil interests in Iraq and Iran. Yet, Dr. King dreamed of an America at peace with itself and at peace with the world. In America, we remember the speech and its words of racial unity, but not long ago, people were marching in violent protest against the removal of a symbol of hate and racism on the University of Virginia campus in Charlottesville. We remember the speech and its words about the sovereignty of God, but religion in this country has been co-opted by the so-called right-wing ideology disguised as evangelicalism that perverts and distorts the gospel as a tool to secure political and economic power and a weapon to oppress those who are most vulnerable. And oh, we thank God that a new generation today is embracing the hope of that dream. On January January the 16th, 2020, just a few days ago, members of the Black Students Association at the University of Chicago Lab School read an open letter at their Martin Luther King assembly. They felt it necessary to pen an open letter to the school to address diversity and racism on campus. They felt it was a way of honoring Dr. King and his words. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. As Christians, we know that God gives us dreams. It is incumbent upon us not to forget or abandon our dreams because they have emerged from the crucible of circumstance as symbols of our faith, that God will indeed make a way out of no way. We must take the time, especially as collective dreamers, to remember and revisit and update the dream. Tamar Jacoby, in her book, Someone Else's House, notes that while we have gained much since Dr. King's historic speech, much has yet to be accomplished. The King dream in its fullest, says Jacoby, is to realize a vision of a single shared community in which both blacks and whites would feel they belong, and race is not a consideration. While our community embraces that dream in theory, for the most part, we have not decided to fully embrace what Dr. King dreamed. We have torn down some barriers. We have desegregated, but we have not integrated. And perhaps as James Baldwin once stated, what good is it to integrate into a burning house? We live in a desegregated neighborhood, but for the most part, we remain separated from our neighbors of a different color. And Sunday morning, beloved, is still the most segregated hour of the week. The dream of Martin Luther King involved more than racial parity. It involved revolutionary economic ideas. In fact, his ideas were so radical that many felt their wealth threatened by his dream. In 1967, King addressed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and laid out an agenda that included using his influence to push for a guaranteed annual income for all Americans and full employment, sustained, if necessary, by the government. In that same speech, he further endorsed the idea of promoting a redistribution of wealth. In this way, he planned to eliminate poverty in America. He admitted, as he struggled, that his initial dream was perhaps too superficial. They called him a communist. King's dream would require churches to plunge themselves into economic development and housing opportunities for the poor. We have not embraced that part of the dream yet, because many of us still invest our resources in bigger buildings. We like to dream about eliminating poverty, but only a small number of churches are doing more than lip service to address the problems of the poor in America. We're mostly concerned with building the treasury and bigger buildings. When it comes to King's dream of economic development to eliminate poverty, we've got amnesia. A year before he was assassinated, Dr. King caused considerable controversy when he spoke against the Vietnam War while the nation was at war. Dr. King felt America's involvement in the Vietnam War was morally and politically wrong. He chided the nation for using up precious resources and lives in a fight that had nothing to do with protecting American freedom. If King was against unjust wars, he was equally opposed to violence in our communities and modern-day lynchings at the hands of law enforcement. Today, the nation embraces the dream with our lips, but we demonstrate that we are not quite ready to embrace it in practice. Dr. King's dream would prohibit us from engaging in wars unless our liberty was being threatened, not just our oil interests. Dr. King's dream would be opposed to all violence and killing, including the death penalty. The person who praises Dr. King as a man of nonviolence hasn't yet embraced the dream if they advocate policies that are violent to the least of these. Even when it comes to nonviolence, there are many who must have amnesia. Tomorrow, many of us will participate in a day off work and a day of service. Dr. Earl J. Fisher, a pastor in Memphis, Tennessee, wrote a commentary in the New Tri-State Defender a few days ago titled, "Day of Service, a superficial sham of a way to celebrate ML King Day." And I hope this is instructive to us because it helps us to see, in a way, the hypocrisy of who we are. He writes in the context of Memphis, but mentions Martin Luther King Day in Memphis and the nation, and says that it has become a sham. What has become superficial, he says, is the spirit and purpose of the day of service. He goes on to say that Dr. King Day became a federal holiday in 1983. 11 years later, in 1994, Congress designated the day as a National Day of Service and assigned the Corporation for National and Community Service with the task of leading the effort. In 2020, the Day of Service, he says, has become a sham. It has been a sham for several years now. The modern MLK Day is used as a day where people evoke Dr. King's name who do not share Dr. King's nature. People who work against the initiatives King fought for, chastise citizens, subversively blaming victims for the social conditions, and challenge them to engage in charitable acts instead of advocating for justice. He talked about a recent interview that he listened to. He listened recently to an interview Dr. King gave to NBC News in 1967. He confessed in that interview that the dream he shared at the March on Washington in 1963 had at many points turned into a nightmare. Dr. King felt he was guilty of, again as James Baldwin coined it, integrating my people into a burning house. We don't ever hear that quote from Dr. King in mid-January, or really ever. Dr. King would go on to suggest that his optimism was a bit superficial and must be tempered with a solid realism. The author goes on to say, well, here's the real. Talking about his own context, he says Memphis is unwilling to highlight the critical claims Dr. King made regarding social change. Hardly any of our social, political, or religious leaders talk about our need for radical transformation those that do are demonized and vilified. We're prodded to pick up more trash, pray for those in poverty, and take a child to a Grizzlies game. Does anyone care that while we're bragging about billion-dollar projects in downtown, midtown, and Harbortown, poverty is increasing in Boxtown and South Memphis and North Memphis? We have money for bridge lights, banquets, and banners, but we can't seem to find money for Black lives. MLK Day makes me think about what we're doing pragmatically for everyday people. People, he says, like one of his new parishioners, Greg. He says he met Greg while he was in jail, facing an armed robbery charge, and he was about 25 years old at the time. He was just beyond the scope of those we now refer to as opportunity youth. In other words, he was just old enough to be left behind by the current thrust of momentum that they had in the city. Greg's life won't be transformed through 100 more hours of community service or baptism into volunteerism. His quality of life won't improve through pious prayers that are disconnected from progressive public policy. What Greg needs is a restructuring of the social conditions. He needs access to a livable wage. He needs health care. He needs a community that will spend more on his education than we spend on his incarceration.
Come on.
Community service only requires a sacrifice of our time. And when you are white, rich, or privileged, time is usually on your side. Time is not on Greg's side. In fact, Greg is trying to reconfigure his life to make up for the time that he's lost. The author goes on to say that Black folks in Memphis are working against the clock. We need people willing to sacrifice their treasure, money made on the backs of Black labor, more than we need tutors to help kids in schools we refuse to support with city tax dollars. Calls for service in an inequitable environment are concoctions of deception and disrespectful to Dr. King's transcendent legacy. Service is cosmetic. Equity is structural. Amen. What if ML King Day became the day where elected officials, clergy, and community advocates presented progressive policy proposals to the public in Dr. King's honor? When King began to advocate for a redistribution of wealth and the revolution of values, he was targeted and killed in Memphis. But maybe he says that's the plan after all. Keep us all chasing a dream, serving, waiting on justice until we die. So, beloved, I wonder, what are we doing with the dream? Because this dream did not begin with Martin Luther King. It is a dream given to the world by Christ himself. It is a dream that one day the wicked would cease from troubling and the weary would be at rest. It is a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every mountain shall be made low. It is a dream that carried Christ to Calvary. It is a dream that motivated Christ to die on an old rugged cross. It is a dream that was reinvigorated by his resurrection early one Sunday morning. It is this faith of our mothers and fathers that has kept our dreams alive. It is the faith of the sainted warriors of the past who kept our hope alive as each succeeding generation marches towards its destiny. It is important that each generation familiarize itself, remember, revisit, and update the dream of Dr. King and countless others who have lifted their voices to say, I have dreamed a dream. Oh, we must hear Frederick Douglass dreaming of our eventual freedom from slavery. We must hear Booker T. Washington dreaming of the skilled and trained Negro workforce. We must hear W.E.B. Du Bois dreaming of the day when our thinking and intelligence will be self-evident. We must hear Marcus Garvey dreaming of the day when we would be proud of our blackness. We must hear A. Philip Randolph dreaming of the day when the working person of color would get their fair share. We must hear Malcolm X dreaming of the day that we will thirst for freedom by any means necessary. We must hear Shirley Chisholm dreaming about a day when our leaders will be unbarred. We must hear Thurgood Marshall dreaming of the day when justice will run down like waters from the courts of this nation. Every believer must not forget the dream and what it really means. We must say, in the words of James Weldon Johnson, we must pray, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far along the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand. May we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Don't forget your God. Don't forget the dream.